Today we are here to announce charging decisions on Joshua Smith, a Florissant police officer. Before we get into that, I want to just kind of remind you how we got where we are. So on Friday evening, June the 5th, the Florissant police chief, who's to my right, Chief Tim Fagan, was made aware of an incident involving several of his officers and an individual in which that individual was struck by a car. Immediately, Chief Fagan had the St. Louis County Police Department step in and handle the investigation. That next morning, I was contacted by Wesley Bell. Mr. Bell indicated that he had a staffer whose family member was involved at the scene of this incident. So for those reasons, he had to recuse his office and have us appointed a special prosecutor. So the investigation commenced immediately. St. Louis County detectives, they had a large number of folks dedicated to this case because obviously it received a lot of public attention, and there was a dire need to get to the bottom of things and get the facts out so the public was made aware of what exactly took place. As you all probably know, it has been reported for the last several weeks, the initial video was taken by a Ring doorbell video system, and it was shocking, to say the least. That was sort of the impetus of the investigation. So today I want to announce, while the investigation is still ongoing, it's nearing a conclusion, we are prepared and have already filed charges against Joshua Smith. Specifically, we have filed assault in the first degree, armed criminal action, and assault in the fourth degree. The actions that we allege are as follows. On the evening of June the 2nd, earlier this month, Officer Smith was a driver in a police SUV. He was involved in a security detail. There were hints of possible looting and vandalism following some of the riots that had taken place in recent days in Ferguson. While they were on site, they observed a vehicle. It was a black Dodge Charger. This Dodge Charger happened to match a description of a vehicle involved in a shots fired case 3 nights prior, on May the 30th, right near the Ferguson Police Department. Officer Smith was accompanied by 2 other officers in that police SUV. They followed the suspect vehicle a short ways. They determined that the suspect vehicle had illegal window tint and had no front license plate, and one of its front headlights was out. They attempted to initiate a traffic stop. They did turn their lights and sirens on, according to Officer Smith's report. At some point, the suspects continued to drive, not at a high speed, but they didn't pull over. They turned off of a major thoroughfare into a neighborhood road. At that point, Officer Smith indicates in his own report that he turned off his police siren and lights, emergency lights on top of the car. Within moments after that, for reasons that are still unknown, the suspect vehicle pulled over to the side of the street, and while it was still in motion, I don't know if it was just not put in park or if the ignition was turned off, nonetheless, there were 3 occupants in that vehicle. One of the occupants is still unidentified. At the time of, in the evening that this took place, the officers were not even aware of the 3rd individual. So as one individual takes off in one direction, the driver exits the vehicle, he takes off in the opposite direction. You can see in the video as the 3rd passenger, who is on the back driver's side, begins to exit the vehicle. That is when the police headlights enter the video frame. What you see immediately after that is the passenger, who is our victim in this case, begins to run directly across the street into a driveway of a neighboring home. At that very moment, you see the headlights on the police SUV turn directly toward the victim, continue to accelerate, and collide with the victim, causing a severe leg injury. Immediately thereafter, the victim, Obviously, he's knocked down, he's in tremendous pain, he's screaming. He gets up, he begins to run away, realizes he can't do that, so he falls in the yard, which is just about 6 feet away from the point of impact, and he's on his back. And you see Officer Smith jump out of the SUV, and before he attempts to apprehend the suspect, he kicks him and then later strikes him. Those would constitute the misdemeanor assault charges that we have filed. Again, the victim suffered a traumatic leg injury. He's required surgery already. I'm told that more surgeries are in the works. This is a case where we have had these situations before where a police officer was not involved, but where someone used a vehicle as a weapon, and in those circumstances, we've always charged it with assault first degree and armed criminal action. The dangerous instrument, of course, being the automobile. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, so before we get to that, I want to introduce Florissant Police Chief Tim Fagan to say a few words. Chief?
Thank you. Good morning. This is a sad day for the Florissant Police Department, but an important day for our community, I think. So there are just two brief points that I wanted to make. The first of which is we strive to be an outstanding law enforcement organization, and we strive to only hire the best people available, and we will continue to do that. But I think it's important in this circumstance that the community know that in the event that our officers step outside of their duties and they do things that they should not, they will always be held accountable as every other citizen and every other member of the public. It's our hope certainly that, once the wounds from this incident start to heal, that we can move forward as a city and certainly as a police department and become better on the other side of this. So certainly want to thank all the agencies that have been involved thus far, whether that be the St. Louis County Police Department, St. Charles County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. The professionalism of both organizations speaks for itself. And again, I think this is an important day for us and for our community, and hopefully it'll allow us to continue to move forward from here.
Thank you, Chief. All right, I don't know that the Chief is going to entertain questions today, but I am, so fire away.
We saw that second camera angle come out yesterday from the victim's attorneys. How much did that weigh on your thought process and the charges involved in this case?
I've seen that vehicle, the video. We saw that probably 10 days or so ago. That didn't weigh in my decision whatsoever. In fact, the victim's attorneys have been apprised of the status of this investigation from the outset. They knew exactly which direction we were going with this, so it was sort of entertaining to read their comments in the news media last night because they already knew what was going to happen. I've never had, in my years of doing this, I've never had an attorney for a victim interfere so much with my case as I have in this particular case. They potentially are jeopardizing their clients' rights in this case. So that's all I can say about that.
Given that release of the video, are you concerned that with all of the evidence that now is in the public stratosphere, there could be difficulties picking a jury in St. Louis County?
It's a good question. We as the prosecutors are just as concerned about the defendant's right to a fair trial as he is. So yeah, the fact that we've got two videos out there, the second of which is probably even worse than the first one, that potentially jeopardizes his right to a fair trial in the sense that there's a whole lot of pretrial publicity. So that was very disappointing, and that was not something that we expected, but we'll deal with it.
Why is the investigation continued, or what are you trying to find moving forward?
Sure, there were 6 police officers that were at the scene eventually. 3 arrived after the incident. There were some paramedics involved. Our detectives have been trying to arrange interviews with each one of those individuals. So far, all of them have been willing to cooperate except for one. I think we have just a handful more interviews to complete. But I believe most of the information we'll get from these folks will just be ancillary background information.
What charges, if any, were filed against the suspects in this case?
I'm not entirely sure if they were charged formally. I know they were released pending application of warrant for at least our victim in this case for possession of paraphernalia. The driver was issued some traffic citations, but again, I don't know if they've been formally charged at all, and that's not within my purview anyway.
Were they aware that they were in fact being detained or they were being attempted to be pulled over by police?
Here's what I can tell you. Our victim was the backseat passenger. He says he never saw the police lights behind him. He said he had no idea who the car was or who was in the car that was behind him. He'd never seen it before. He was scared. Again, I don't know why they made the decision to jump out of the vehicle, but that's what they did.
You indicated that there were 6 officers on the scene, and you indicated earlier that you had access to the video approximately 10 days ago. Is there a reason that you haven't talked to these officers? Is that the normal course of investigating?
Well, so I think to the core of your question, the investigation really is wrapped up, in our experience, rather quickly. Again, St. Louis County didn't get this case until, at this point, it was Saturday the 6th. So it's been less than 2 weeks that they've been on this case. And I know they've been diligently working to try to arrange interviews. Some of the folks that were interviewed have chosen to have legal representation, so that's an extra layer of time that is added to the process. So there's nothing unusual about this process.
Is Officer Smith the uncooperative officer that you mentioned that hasn't spoken with you guys?
Well, I'm not, under the rules of ethics, I'm not allowed to address whether or not he's made any comments, so I can't answer that.
As part of the investigation, though, are you looking at the reports that they may or may have not made, and did you look at whether or not there would be a filing of false report?
Sure, so that's a good question. In Officer Smith's report, he indicated that as he saw the victim exit the vehicle, the victim darted in front of his car, and in an effort to avoid colliding with him, he swerved. And nonetheless, the collision took place. The video evidence just proves that's patently false. That didn't happen that way. So yeah, those reports are being reviewed. There are other internal reports that are not yet completed that we'll certainly review. So that's part of the ongoing investigation.
Could he have been charged with making a false report?
We're looking into that. There's no specific statute, believe it or not. If we can prove that a police officer lies in a police report, there's no specific statute that addresses that. So depending on how the rest of the evidence shakes out, we could potentially have a charge there, but I'm not prepared to announce that yet.
There were reports pretty early on that the officer involved in this had been involved in lawsuits, one of which kind of alleged his vehicle was used in a manner like this. How much do you know about that? Can you expand on that?
I probably know less than you do about that. I read about it myself, but I don't know anything about it.
A lot of protesting has been taking place, calling for charges all over the St. Louis area. Do you have anything to say to protesters who were asking you for charges?
Yeah, I certainly support their right to protest, and we had some folks out our building the last few days. They were well behaved. They were some of them not all that well behaved, but they have a right to express themselves. And what was unique for me. Not just in this particular case, but in all the protests that are going on around our area and around the country. It's the multiracial component of the protesters. This is not just a black thing anymore. This is an us thing. This is a we the people thing. So I was proud to see them out there expressing themselves, but I will say that didn't influence our decision. For us, we're just guided by the facts, and it's pretty straightforward.
In previous cases involving this particular officer, he's listed as a FBI task force agent. Is he still working in that capacity?
I don't believe so, Chief. Is that? Well,
No.
He's not employed there anymore, but at the time this incident occurred, he was not.
Will the investigation now look back into any of these other incidents of question involving him?
Yeah, that's something we have to uncover. Whether that's going to be evidence in this case, I can't tell you yet, but we're certainly going to look into it.
How many more officers were involved in?
So we had 6 total that evening. So there were 3 in one vehicle, 3 in another vehicle. The second vehicle arrived after the collision took place and after the injury took place.
What is happening with the 2 officers that was in the same vehicle with Officer Joshua?
They're being interviewed. One was interviewed yesterday. One's going to be interviewed tomorrow. So far, the one who was interviewed yesterday really didn't have anything new no new information for us.
At this point, do you anticipate any charges on any of the other officers?
That's hard to say. Got to hear what they have to say first. I will say at the moment, I don't think they're anything more than witnesses to a crime, but that remains to be seen.
Can you go through the process in which a report is filed and whether or not the other officers had to sign off as to the truthfulness of that initial report and whether or not they did that?
Sure. Each department has its own individual policy on how those reports are handled. In this particular case, Officer Smith wrote his report, and the other two officers weren't required to sign off on that or to write a supplemental report to that. So he followed proper protocol with that. There was a separate use of force report that was filed after the fact. I don't know exactly when. In fact, in talking to the chief, he hasn't even seen it yet. But that's the responsibility of a sergeant who is over these folks. And what was the last part of your question?
Whether or not they actually signed off as witnesses to that.
Okay, no, they didn't, but that wouldn't be part of a policy.
The video clearly shows a police or a helicopter of some sort. Was it following that incident, and are you able to get any more evidence from that helicopter?
Yeah, it arrived on scene while the incident was in progress. There's no video from the helicopter. Our detectives have interviewed the pilot and co-pilot, neither of whom were able to really add anything new to the situation. They didn't see the collision. They were about 900 feet up.
Were they there because of the chase, or I don't know what to call it, but because of the shots fired call?
Yes.
Is that why the helicopter was there?
Yes.
So Chief, in your report, you said that it was an accident. Is that still your statement?
I'm sorry?
In your initial statement that came out, you said it was an accident.
In my initial statement that came out, I don't know what you're referring to, but the officer that was involved said that this was an accident. The officer that was involved. Yes.
Is the internal investigation still underway?
It is.
The two other officers that were in that car with Smith, are they on the job?
They're not.
Okay, are they suspended with pay?
Yes.
How about the other three officers?
No, they are working currently.
Are any of them still listed as a task force agents at this point?
No.
Chief, will this impact any of the practices within the Florissant Police Department going forward?
Well, certainly all of that is what we're reviewing currently. As I've stated before, is that obviously, the normal course of business would have us do an internal investigation after the criminal investigation is done for a variety of reasons. We started that process early, and so that process is proceeding, but it's proceeding slowly. And so we'll obviously evaluate everything it is that we do.
And can you walk us why it's assault first and not any other charge?
Sure. So in assault first, you've got to prove that the individual knowingly caused serious physical injury by means of a dangerous instrument or deadly weapon. In this particular case, our view of the evidence, just what we see with our own two eyes, the moment that vehicle turned its headlights towards the victim, that became a 4,000-pound missile. So that's our dangerous instrument.
And that charge has a mandatory minimum, is that right?
It does.
Can you talk about that?
10 to 30,
Sentencing range.
10 to 30 years on the assault one. ACA, same range of punishment. ACA, if you're convicted, you have to serve a minimum of 3 years in prison. Again, these are allegations, these are charges, and we'll see how things play out moving forward.
Is there a black box type recorder in the car at all?
There was not in this vehicle. There would have been in a regular cruiser, but this one, it was a detective SUV, so it didn't have the same black box recording.
Do you think they need to have them moving forward?
Might be a good idea. Okay.
When will you be arrested?
Pardon me?
When will you be arrested?
My information is that he was turning himself in this morning. Charges were filed, it was probably about 10:30 this morning when the warrant was issued. My understanding was that his attorney was going to escort him into the building to have him turn himself in.
Do you recall last time your office has charged an officer?
We've charged a handful over the years. I work with these guys every day, and there are a lot of good cops. Every cop I work with is a good cop, and situations like this that good cops hate because it makes everybody look bad. It drags everybody down. And you know, there's no joy in filing a criminal charge against anybody, and today's no different.
And there needs to be a change to the law so that it is clear that if an officer files a false report, that's a crime.
I do. There needs to be some clarity there. It's just not there right now.
Something you'd be willing to work with the legislature on?
I got enough stuff to do right now.
Do you anticipate this affecting pending cases and maybe even prior cases involving this officer? You know, the question of integrity as to whether or not this officer has been maybe conducting business in the same manner.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate some of the federal cases that he's been involved in? I brought up quite a few.
Yeah, so under the law, if you have an officer who's a witness in a criminal case and he's got some sort of alleged misconduct, that's a broad definition. He goes on what's called the Brady list, which means that we as prosecutors have a responsibility to disclose that information to the defense and let them have the opportunity to cross-examine him. So again, those would all be St. Louis County cases, so that's Wesley Bell's office, but I can assure you that they are, if they haven't already, they are going to thoroughly review the cases in which this man was involved.
Where else has he worked previously?
I don't know. Chief, do you know?
I don't have his personnel records with me currently, so I don't know.
Did I hear another question over here?
I was going to ask that. What other department do you work for?
Okay. All right, anything else? Okay, guys, thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate it.